I have schizophrenia, and my sister-in-law keeps whispering at me in an attempt to drive me insane. My wife is on her side. I have schizophrenia, and I truly believe that when my sister-in-law moved into our house, she started trying to drive me insane. She started whispering at me, and when I asked her what she said, she'd pretend to be worried and say nothing. My reason for thinking this is because the voices only occur around her, and previously to her moving in, I hadn't experienced anything like this in quite some time. It took months of her supposedly whispering around me before my first breakdown, during which I silently cried in bed telling myself it's just her, and I'm not insane. But then, after a second breakdown, mere weeks after the first one, I told my wife, Clara. When I did, she looked worried at me, not because of the possibility her sister was doing this, but because of what she thought might be happening to me. She kept telling me that her sister would never do such a thing. Clara's reassurance that her sister would never intend harm didn't ease my mind. If anything, it put me more on edge. The whispers I heard when Nadia was nearby seemed too natural, too frequent to ignore. I watched her more closely, noting how she often muttered to herself when she thought no one was looking, and how she lingered in doorways, lost in thought. I started to pay more attention to the sounds in our home, trying to catch clear words or phrases from Nadia that would prove I wasn't imagining things. But the more I listened, the less I seemed to understand, hearing only bits that made no sense. Clara's frustration with me grew as she saw me becoming more withdrawn and obsessed with proving Nadia was whispering. Months passed, and even though I was taking my meds right and seeing my psychiatrist regularly, the whispers that I believed were coming from Nadia continued. My doctor had adjusted my medications several times in an effort to subdue what was diagnosed as auditory hallucinations, but no adjustment seemed to make a difference. Every tweak brought a flicker of hope that quickly faded as the murmurs continued. The more I heard, the more I studied Nadia's every action, every whisper, every subtle glance she made, I saw as a confirmation of her intent to weaken my mental health. I was certain she was whispering just low enough for me to hear, but without enough clarity for me to confront her directly. I felt Clara watch my condition worsen and could sense her growing concern. Initially, she dismissed my accusations as a symptom of my illness, trusting her sister completely. However, as my fixation on Nadia's supposed whispers intensified, so did the tension within our home. Clara found herself in a difficult position, torn between her loyalty to her sister and her commitment to support me. One evening, the situation escalated dramatically. While walking down the hallway, I heard it, a whisper, clearer than ever, unmistakably from Nadia. It was a simple, sinister murmur, just audible enough to catch. My heart pounded as I rounded the corner into the kitchen, where I found Nadia, a glass of water in her hand, seemingly oblivious to my presence. I was so over it at this point. I couldn't hold back any longer. I yelled at her. I told her to quit the charade and just admit it was her whispering to me. I then asked her why she was doing this and what she could possibly gain from it. She acted like she didn't know what I was talking about and began to cry. She cried and ran out of the house. I knew she was going to call Clara, and I panicked. Clara hates it when she gets calls while she's at work. I could only imagine how mad she would be when she found out about my confrontation with the whispers. Jess didn't come back home until Clara pulled into the driveway. My heartbeat picked up at the thought of what Nadia could have told her. If she would lie about the whispers, what else could she lie about? I thought. Clara walked inside the house and told me how she was struggling to understand everything that was happening. I tried to give her my side of the story, and she said to let her finish. She went on to say that it breaks her heart to see me suffer, but it's also just as hard to hear such serious accusations against Nadia. As I tried to tell her the truth, she told me that she didn't want us to lose what we had over something that might be my illness, misleading us. Throughout this conversation, Nadia is behind her, crying and nodding her head in agreement. I couldn't believe how far she would take this lie. What was in it for her? I felt like this was all part of some sick, twisted game she was playing. I agreed and left it at that. I felt that if I would say anything at the moment, it would come from a place of anger, and Clara wouldn't really hear me. I waited until the following day after I had calmed down to speak to Clara about Nadia. I tried to explain my side, to convey how the whispers were affecting me deeply. Clara listened, but ultimately decided that my issues were too complex for us to handle alone. She suggested that I needed more specialized help than what could be provided at home. The idea of being admitted to a psychiatric ward was jarring. It felt like a drastic step, but it also acknowledged the gravity of my mental state. The idea of being sent away from her to a hospital made me feel like she was giving up on me. I didn't want to go, and when I tried to tell her, we ended up having a big argument. We both felt strongly and couldn't agree, which just made things worse. Instead of continuing to argue, I decided to be quiet and think of another way to show her what was going on. I had a plan. If Clara could just notice some of the weird things Nadia was doing, maybe she would understand why I was so upset. Over the next few days, I paid close attention to Nadia whenever she was around. Nadia seemed normal most of the time, but sometimes she did small things that were strange, like talking quietly to herself, or stopping suddenly like she was listening to something no one else could hear. Whenever Nadia did something odd, I tried to make sure Clara was there to see it. I didn't say anything. I just hoped Clara would start to notice these things on her own. My goal wasn't to make Clara scared or to spy on Nadia, but just to help Clara see what was bothering me so much. Clara kept a close eye on Nadia, noticing more of the strange behaviors I had pointed out. Nadia's quiet muttering and sudden pauses became increasingly apparent. I could see Clara's initial skepticism began to go away, and she started to believe that something unusual was indeed happening. Seeing this shift, I decided to take further action. I began recording Nadia's odd behavior on my phone. I captured moments that might prove she was whispering intentionally. Each time Nadia exhibited strange behavior, I discreetly recorded it. I collected several recordings showing her speaking quietly to herself, pausing mid-task as if listening to something, and moving her lips without making a sound. One evening, after a particularly stressful day, I went to the bathroom to wash the day off of me. The whispers had been persistent since I got home, and I needed a break. I set my phone on the bathroom counter, unintentionally leaving it recording as I tried to gather my thoughts. As I sat there, the whispers started again. My heart began to race. It felt like Nadia was right outside, whispering directly at me. I tried to focus on the sound, to catch any clear words or phrases, but it was difficult to distinguish anything specific. After a few minutes, I left the bathroom. The voices went away as suddenly as they had begun. I picked up my phone, stopping the recording without thinking much of it. It wasn't until later, when I reviewed the video out of sheer desperation to find some proof, that I made a startling discovery. In the recording, I could hear the sound of the bathroom door creaking softly. The noises started again, clearer this time, and unmistakably Nadia's voice. She was whispering just outside the bathroom door. My heart pounded as I listened. I played the recording again, making sure I wasn't imagining things. There was no doubt about it. Nadia was whispering to mess with me, and now I had proof. The realization hit me hard. I wasn't losing my mind. Someone was intentionally trying to make me think I was. Now that I had this new evidence, I felt like this was exactly what I needed to prove to Clara that I wasn't crazy, and finally get back on track with my psychiatrist. What I was experiencing was real. Nadia's whispers weren't figments of my imagination. I decided to get more evidence as the days progressed. Eventually, one evening when I gathered enough courage, I showed Clara the recordings. She watched closely, her expression changing from concern to shock as she saw the evidence. The videos showed Nadia muttering while cooking, stopping abruptly in conversations, and speaking softly to no one. Clara's face grew pale as she processed what she was seeing. I felt the tension between us ease as we now understood one another. We decided to confront Nadia with the evidence. The next evening, we asked Nadia to join us in the living room after dinner. Clara began the conversation gently, expressing concern for Nadia's well-being and mentioning that we had noticed some unusual behavior. Nadia looked anxious as I showed her the recordings. Her composure started to crack, her hands began fidgeting, and her eyes were darting around the room, avoiding our gaze. After watching the recordings, Nadia finally broke down. When Clara had given her a moment to explain herself, her voice was barely a whisper. She admitted to whispering outside the bathroom door, in the kitchen, at dinner, and every other time. She acknowledged that she had been deliberately trying to mess with me. She looked ashamed. Clara pressed her for the reason behind her actions. She needed to understand why Nadia would do something so cruel. The urgency in Clara's voice grew as she demanded an explanation. She was losing patience with her sister. Nadia hesitated, struggling to find the right words. Finally, she confessed that she believed it was not safe for her to live in the same house as me because of my schizophrenia. She explained that she had read about the condition and felt convinced that I could become dangerous. Her whispers and strange behaviors were an attempt to protect herself by pushing me to seek more intensive treatment or to leave the house. Clara listened. She couldn't comprehend why Nadia had chosen such a hurtful way to address her concerns. The revelation that Nadia's actions were driven by fear didn't take away her responsibility in the matter. Clara took a deep breath, trying to process everything. She told Nadia that while she understood her fear, her actions were unacceptable. She asked if she understood the amount of harm she'd caused. Clara's voice wavered as she expressed the pain and stress the situation had caused both of us. She emphasized that trust had been broken. Nadia had tears in her eyes and apologized repeatedly. She expressed regret for her actions. She admitted that she hadn't fully understood the impact of her behavior and was genuinely sorry for the pain she had caused. She promised to seek help for her own issues and to work towards making amends. After Nadia's confession, Clara and I knew we had to make a tough decision. Nadia's actions had caused a lot of pain and mistrust. Despite her apologies and efforts to seek help, the damage was too big to ignore. Clara decided it was best for Nadia to leave our home. The next morning, Clara asked Nadia to join us in the living room. Nadia looked worried, sensing something serious was coming. Clara calmly explained that her behavior had deeply affected our lives and that we could no longer have her stay with us. She listened, looking sad and resigned, understanding the consequences of her actions. Nadia's expression quickly shifted from worry to anger. She became agitated, her face balled up like dirty laundry. Nadia's voice rose as she accused us of using her and abandoning her, just like her ex-boyfriend had done. Clara remained calm, though it was clear she was struggling to maintain her composure. Nadia's anger grew more intense. She insisted she had nowhere else to go and that we were her only family. The tension in the room was obvious, each word sharpening the divide between us. I stood by, feeling a mix of emotions. I understood her fear and anger, but the trust had been too deeply broken. Clara, though clearly affected by Nadia's words, stood firm. She conveyed that this decision was about ensuring a safe and healthy environment for everyone. Nadia's outburst didn't change the necessity of our decision. Her accusations were painful to hear, but we knew we had to follow through. Clara remained stiff in her decision. Even though I could see how hard it was to kick her sister out, she told her that this was for the best. After the conversation, Nadia stormed off to pack her belongings. The atmosphere was tense, and the silence that followed her departure was heavy. Clara helped her sister pack, the process marked by awkward, strained silence. I stayed out of the way, feeling a mix of relief, guilt, and sadness. Nadia's departure was good for us since her entire time here was stressful, but it also saddened us at the loss of a family connection. When it was time for Nadia to leave, Clara walked her to the door. Clara went in for a hug, and Nadia shoved her aside, Nadia's anger still simmering beneath the surface. She turned to me, and her eyes looked like she wasn't done with me yet. She mouthed something, but I couldn't quite make out what. Once Nadia left, the house felt empty. The silence, which once felt suffocating, now felt peaceful. Clara and I focused on repairing our relationship, and she cut all contact with Nadia.